Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Olga Khazan, who is staff writer at The Atlantic magazine, also the author of a couple of books. This one just came out. It's called Me But Better, The Science and Promise of Personality Change. And the previous book is called Weird, The Power of Being an Outsider in an Insider World. Welcome, Olga.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You know, both these books are, I think they're a combination of memoir and the study of a particular phenomenon, right? So, you know, you're trying to figure out, right, the science of personality and personality change in the most recent book. And then in the previous book, you're trying to figure out kind of the value of being an outsider, not just to society at large, but also to you as an individual. And the Me But Better book, you actually walked through a journey that you embarked on to try to actually engage in some personality modification, right? And so, I mean, I guess, you know, as a journalist, when you decide to do something, you know, you're at an advantage as opposed to normal people because, you know, you don't just do it. You actually, you know, investigate the science of doing it, and you get to kind of go and talk to the people who are actually doing the research and kind of producing the products that you're going to sample. I mean, this is kind of cool. It kind of makes everybody want to be a journalist.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really rough industry that does have huge intellectual rewards and a lot of upsides as far as like discovery and like day-to-day life interest. But I can't say that I would recommend anyone like become a journalist.
Okay. Well, just, you know, figure out a way to take advantage of journalistic privileges, right? Maybe, you know, without being a journalist. But look, the idea of changing your personality, I mean, in previous eras, we would talk about sort of, you know, changing your behavior maybe, or, I don't know, changing the way you react to the world. But, you know, ever since the idea of personality was more or less invented by scientific community, you know, we tend to think in terms of personality and personality change. And you walk through a lot of the literature on how we kind of came to think about this notion of personality. Could you maybe just walk through, like, when did you decide that you thought your personality needed a little bit of a tune-up?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, personality wasn't always an established concept. I really, you know, things kind of coalesced around the big five personality traits in the 1980s. That's kind of what most scientists use today is, you know, they kind of test people on where they fall along the big five. And that is kind of your personality. So I kind of got interested in this when I started reading a lot of the literature on personality change. And I felt like it would address a lot of the stuff that I wasn't crazy about in my own life at that point. And wanted something that was more all encompassing than like, try meditation or like, you know, try mindfulness or the kind of the typical tips that you get. I thought it was really interesting that they were actually able to teach people these new patterns of behavior and ways of thinking that seem to endure for months at least. So I kind of my like whoa moment was like one of the main kind of psychologists that I follow for the book is Nathan Hudson at SMU. And he runs this website called personalityassessor.com, where he has a bunch of different personality tests that all use the big five, kind of variations on measuring the big five. And I took like a pretty standard big five test. It's like the IPIP 120, I think, or I kind of switched between the 120 and the 300. That showed me that I was pretty good on openness or very good on openness and conscientiousness, but low on agreeableness and extremely low on extroversion and extremely high on neuroticism. And so it's probably no surprise to anyone that like being very neurotic and very low on extroversion is correlated with what they call in science bad outcomes. So like being unhappy, not being mentally healthy, stress and anxiety, and kind of loneliness, things like that. So that's kind of why I decided to address it through personality change.
Yeah, but I mean, the language that you're using seems to imply that, there are sort of ideal personality profiles, right? Or, ones that are better suited for our environment. But I mean, aren't there a lot of personality theorists who would say that, there is no good or bad or right or wrong associated with these different traits?
I have not encountered theorists who would say there's no good or bad associated with the traits. I think when I get this question, I think people are thinking of like, well, should I never experience anxiety? Should I never experience introversion? Should I always agree with everything everyone says? And that's not what these are saying. What these are saying is that people with relatively high levels of these, they tend to have a healthier personality profile. Like they tend to not get as anxious as often. Of course, they still experience anxiety and stress like everyone else, but they can roll through it faster. They can contextualize it better. They can bounce back. They're more resilient. So that's kind of like what you like to see as far as dealing with anxiety, as opposed to someone who's just like never anxious. And the same with agreeableness. Like a lot of agreeable people, including some of the, when I was trying to improve my own agreeableness, I one of the things I did was volunteer at a homeless shelter. These are probably the most agreeable people on earth. Like they're super religious. They're literally helping the homeless with their day-to-day lives. They make like no money. They're eating the same lunch that they give the homeless people, like just, which is usually honestly like cast-offs from like local restaurants. Like they're basically like devoting their lives to this like selfless deed, but they have a ton of boundaries and like rules for their clients that can seem very disagreeable. Like people had to wear masks. They had to behave a certain way when they were in the lunch line. They had to do things in a certain order. And, that can seem kind of disagreeable. So we all have moments when we're showing kind of the opposite side of these traits or the bad side. But the key is sort of how you, what is your general trend and how do you bounce back from those low moments?
I mean, I got the sense from the book that there were certain things about the traits that you wanted to abandon that you saw as somewhat functional in your life, right? Like the neuroticism that you wanted to reduce seemed to have served a purpose in your life, right? Gotten you to, I don't know, be more diligent in your work, and conscientiousness and your neuroticism were kind of tied up together. I mean, did you find that there was some nostalgia for some of the traits that you were pushing away at some point?
Yeah, especially with neuroticism. I think I, like a lot of other people, got planning confused with worrying. So I was very good at planning. That's part of conscientiousness. And with that, I would also worry about the plans a lot. Like I would go back and revisit and make sure, like, is this okay? Did that email sound okay? Is this all right? Like, is this really the right move? Like, should I be doing this? Should I revise this one more time? And that is more like a worrying or like rumination cycle that's more associated with neuroticism. So what I really like, what a lot of the experts I talk to and what I try to do now is to disentangle the two. So you can plan, like a lot of conscientious people do have plans that they put in place. They have to-do lists, they have calendars, they have stuff coming up that they need to do, but they don't revisit those plans over and over again in a kind of obsessive way, which is what you kind of see more as the thought pattern associated with anxiety. So yes, I was worried that like with the lower neuroticism that my conscientiousness would also go down, but it was really a way of or the trick was really to see how they can be untangled. And actually, the research does not show that neuroticism and conscientiousness are correlated. I've asked this question of Brent Roberts like many, many times because I could not believe it. And there's really no data showing that people who are more anxious are also more conscientious, unless you consider that there's like some elements of conscientiousness that are higher in women and women are more neurotic. And so you have one person who has both, right? But mostly it's the fact that conscientious people are just really good at setting up systems to like remind themselves to do things. And neuroticism actually gets in the way of that. It doesn't help you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea behind the big five was that they were looking for attributes that were, orthogonal to each other, right? But it seems like what you're striving for is a world where you can kind of cherry pick the attributes of each personality that seems to be functional, so that you don't have to take the bitter with the sweet.
Yeah, I mean, most personality change, like they first ask you like, what traits do you want to change? Because few people, and I didn't, like few people want to change all 5 traits, right? Few people are like, I'm so bad that I'm not conscientious and I'm super neurotic and I like am really just like, most people have like 1 or 2 strengths, that they can build on to improve the others. So most people have like I'd like to be less, I'd like to be more extroverted or something, but they feel like they are very agreeable or they are very open. So you really like most of the interventions are focused on working on 1 or 2 traits at a time.
I mean, I think the conventional view of personality is, number one, that it is difficult to change, right? That people more or less have a personality and they're stuck with it, and also that it's sort of persistent. So that, you don't actually vary in personality traits due to the environment. And I think, when you dig deeper, you found that both of those things, which may have been a consensus at one point, are no longer a consensus.
Yeah, I think so most people would still now say that like most people's personalities are more or less recognizable, from, let's say, adulthood through old age. So you're not going to be like a completely different person who like, people who meet you once in college and once, when you're 50 or 60 are going to, have no idea who you are and like what happened to you. But most people also notice changes in themselves over time that are, minor but significant. And, it might be adaptive to the kind of life that you're living. It might be something where you took on a new role, or you had kids or didn't have kids, or you moved somewhere or didn't move somewhere, and your personality changes as a result. Or, you might have actually tried to change your personality. And a lot of people do that without calling it that. Like they will stop drinking, or they will go on this quest to like make a bunch of new friends or something, and they'll be, different as a result. So when you do look kind of a little bit more closely, people do change often on at least one trait over the course of their lives. And we also see this in ourselves. Like if you look up a Facebook status from, people who joined Facebook, as I did in like early college, it shows me like, remember this, like you said this in 2009. And I'm like, why did I say that? What on earth was I thinking? Like, we all kind of look back on things we said and did years ago, decades ago, and don't recognize that person. And that's because our personalities changed.
Well, I mean, William James talks about this maturity principle, right? So that there seems to be some shift that most people go through. But I mean, if you know about that, like, let's say, that people become, I don't know, you tell me which direction it goes. Is this something that if you say, I'm going to change, so I don't need to do anything? Or do people change precisely because, they have these experiences and they, reflect on them and they, and they modify themselves in general?
Yeah, so everyone will change slightly even if they don't do anything. So you can just like buckle up and like enjoy the ride, I guess. The maturity principle, like people become less neurotic, more conscientious over time. So those are both positive changes, and most of us will kind of enjoy those. But volitional personality change, which is what my book is really about, is trying to make a more pronounced change in a shorter period of time. And the kind of type of thing I'm talking about is like starting therapy. Like most people, if they have a problem, they don't kind of sit back and say, this problem will eventually go away, so I'm not going to like get therapy. They're like, I want to go see a therapist because I want this process to resolve faster. Like I want to get over this problem sooner. And so it's similar with volitional personality changes. Like you're noticing a problem in your life and you're taking steps to change it faster than it would change naturally.
Yeah, I mean, is it more like weight loss through, exercise, or more like weight loss through liposuction? Like is it?
Oh,
is
interesting.
How hard did you find this process to be?
Okay, so I found it very hard. I found different traits hard on different levels, and for different reasons, and I can go into that. Neuroticism was by far the hardest, and extroversion I found the easiest to change. And that's
Because I think with extroversion, it's mainly fake it till you make it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's also like you get a lot of positive feedback when you're being extroverted. Like you're going out and talking to people and people are like, hey, yeah. And like you're kind of bonding and like smiling and, you kind of feed off the energy of others. When you're just like meditating on your own in your room for hours, you don't get any positive feedback. Like it's it can be a really intense and often for some people negative experience. So some of them are a little bit more like liposuction, right? Some of them are like extroversion, just go out and talk to people, you're an extrovert, you know what I mean? Like if you act like an extrovert, you are one. Some of them are more like long-term, like weight loss and long-term diet and exercise, where if you're trying to reduce your levels of neuroticism, like there's a lot of internal work that you have to do where you're like, why am I so anxious? Like what brings up my anxiety? What seems to help bring it down? Like, how can I think about things in a more rational way? Like these are long-term processes that it can take the full 3 months or whatever that you're working on it. And it can also be like many years,
Right. I mean, I think in the educational environment, a lot of people are saying, you have to adapt your, say, teaching style to different personality types, right? And I always thought, well, that assumes that education is not meant to be transformational, right? And similarly, if we look at social media marketing, right? Social media marketing is all about saying, okay, let's figure out what somebody's personality is, and then just give them all the stuff that appeals to that personality type. And that would presumably just, reinforce it, as opposed to, maybe guiding someone in a particular direction.
Yeah, it's interesting that they say for their personality type, because I've often heard of learning styles like visual and auditory, and there's actually not a lot of evidence for those. Like most people are not like only a visual learner and like an auditory learner. And also like the ease with which you learn something is not necessarily like better. Like sometimes like having a more challenging time learning something is like, it helps you remember it better. Also, I don't know how you would change your teaching style to match people's personality, because there are so many different personalities in a classroom.
There's a couple. So one, I think that usually comes up is introversion versus extroversion. And, if you're cold calling people on class, you expect people to stand up and do presentations and stuff like that. This can be a lot harder for an introverted person than an extroverted person, but to some degree, the reason why you're going to, say, an MBA program is because, you want to become more extroverted, right? It's part of the goal of the thing. Certainly it was for me. I remember, when I was a PhD student, I was very introverted, went to business school, became extroverted. But, then when I went back to PhD, it kind of went introverted again. It's like the weight loss thing. Or another one would be, conscientiousness, right? So a lot of people saying, well, for the unconscientious people, you got to let them turn in their homework late and stuff like that, right? But I mean, if you go to the military and they say, well, you're not conscientious, so that's fine. But the reason why you join the military, presumably, is because you kind of want to learn to be, conscientious.
Well, that's so interesting. So I totally disagree with that approach. I'm sorry. Because I think that like, it is more stressful for the introverts to be called on and have to like extemporaneously say something in class, but that is so valuable for being a business leader. Like that is something that like a lot of people that I talk to who had to like become more extroverted, they didn't even, maybe they're not an extrovert in their free time, like when they're at home relaxing, they still like to be very introverted. But a big part of what was, transform them from, just rank and file to a manager, or, help them go from just being a professional to someone who gives talks and presentations, is learning kind of how to do that. It's like, and Brian Little, one of the experts that I talked to, his take on personality change is a little different. It's not that you permanently change, but it's almost sort of like you put on this like cloak and you're kind of like, I'm an extrovert while I'm wearing this cloak. And it's because I have to do it for something that's important to me. So for him, it's teaching. He's very introverted, but he really loves teaching and he wants to be very extroverted when he teaches. I would say for students, especially MBA students, like it's very important to learn how to like at least present as an extrovert at times. So I don't know. That's my take on it. Nobody asked me though from your school. So
yeah, but I mean, but I mean, that's the idea that different environments, right, require different sorts of behaviors, and different behaviors are made easier or harder depending on the personality you bring to the occasion, right?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people like, it's funny when when I was doing these interviews, like a lot of people were like, I don't really believe in personality change. I just know that when I became a TV presenter, I had to learn how to be extroverted. Like that is personality change. And so, but we all do that to various, extent. Like when you're fighting with your kids' daycare provider or not giving them snacks that they're allergic to, you're not going to be very agreeable, and that's good. Like you need to show that you mean business and to prioritize your family's needs over theirs. But when you're, socializing at the, family reunion, you do need to kind of be agreeable in order to make everyone have a good time. So we all have times that we kind of have to learn how to turn on certain traits.
Yeah. Well, let's walk through them. And because for each of them, you wound up looking for different techniques. And, with extroversion, I think you started with extroversion. You talked about improv. We are using a lot of improv in business schools to kind of, it does a lot of things. I mean, extroversion is one thing that you get from this, but it seems to be something that's becoming more and more popular, this idea of, improv. How did you find improv?
So I had always been like improv curious. I sort of had heard about it a lot, and I also knew that it was like used in MBA stuff and business settings, and then also some therapy like settings use improv. Improv actually originated as sort of a theater for people who don't speak the same language. It was like so immigrants could kind of communicate with each other and also have something to do. It started at this like immigrant center in Chicago. So it's kind of had a lot of uses over the years, and people kind of get out of it what they put into it, sort of. But what improv is really good at is if you are someone who is very controlling of situations or likes to be in control, it completely breaks you of that immediately, because there is absolutely no way to control what's happening in improv. Everything is so made up and so confusing, and so you have to like be in the moment and just like pivot on the spot with whatever's happening. And for me, that really helped with extroversion, but also kind of just some of the parts of me that were kind of not willing to be extroverted. Like I was scared that if something didn't go perfectly, like let's just not do it if it's not going to go very well. Or like I have to, this, coffee meetup has to get an A+, or else I'm not going to just meet this person for coffee.
Yeah. So your introversion was in many ways a type of perfectionism.
Yeah. Like it was very like my interactions had to be great, or else like I wasn't going to have interactions. And improv is really good at breaking you of that, because it sort of shows that like everything can be kind of screwy and not really make sense, and it's still okay. Like, I don't super remember any of my skits, I mean, other than the ones I wrote about, but they were all like kind of funny. People had an okay time. If not, it doesn't matter. Like, for me, I don't know. I think it just has so many benefits beyond, even if you don't really like improv comedy.
Yeah. And what's the advantage of extroversion? I mean, extroversion seems to be something that's deeply American. If you go back to Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people. I mean, in some ways, that's kind of a guide to extroversion. I mean, is extroversion something that's particularly valuable in, say, modern American context? I mean, you talk about how difficult it is to make friendships when you're, in your 30s and 40s. I mean, if you were just crammed into some little town surrounded by people, like you wouldn't need to be extroverted, right? I mean, you would, if you're in a dorm, you don't need to be extroverted to quite the same degree you do when you're kind of out trying to, make business contacts and, build your network and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think extroversion is important. Most studies show that extroverts are happier. In part, that's just because they have more social connections and, I'm not going to like recite all the research that shows that more social connections make you happy. There's just something about being seen by other people, feeling like you're part of a community, feeling like you matter, that is really beneficial for health and can't be replicated by reading a book or watching a TV show. It just, you have to be around other people and feel like a human. This is why so many of us had such a hard time during COVID, is that even, sometimes staring at a Zoom screen is not a good replacement for human connection. So there's that element of it. But it's also just that like, interesting things tend to happen when you get out and talk to people. If you just stay in for the night and watch TV again, you kind of already know how it's going to go. I think part of the extrovert happiness advantage is just that they have like more variety and kind of texture to their lives. They do more things that are challenging, and like in those challenges, you also get rewards. So I don't know. I kind of think there's like two sides of that, but the long and the short is that they're happier.
And now what about neuroticism? I mean, we all know, neuroticism is probably going to lead to less happiness. But I've seen studies that show that like neurotics live longer, maybe because they're like super obsessed, they got to go back and make sure that the gas is turned off and, that sort of thing. So
I don't know about the longevity of neuroticism when controlling for other factors. I wonder if part of that is just that women are more neurotic and women live longer, not because they're neurotic, but for other biological reasons. But in a way, I mean, if you're a mom and you're not neurotic, then, you leave your kid in front of the bus, right? Yeah. Like some neuroticism is protective. Like we all worry about people who seem to not have enough anxiety. Like they have not lined up a place to live, or they have not, they're just kind of, they didn't book a hotel and they're on a vacation. Like they're just kind of whatever. And you worry about those people. You wish they had more neuroticism. But in general, it's kind of thought that even if you are someone who feels these spikes of anxiety, it's a good idea to learn techniques to bring them down or put them in context or do something with that anxiety other than just ruminate on it.
I mean, could it be that neuroticism made a lot of sense in a world where you were surrounded by threats, and now we live in a pretty comfortable cush. I mean, you live in, obviously there's neighborhoods where if you're not neurotic enough, you're going to get mugged and stuff. But, for most of the environments in which we live, we don't really have to worry about all that much. So this neuroticism might just be a leftover from previous eras.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're all descendants of people who were neurotic enough to not get eaten by the lion, right? Like we are all like here because our ancestors were neurotic. And it's true. And neuroticism will keep you very safe because you will never do anything. But you have to ask yourself whether you want a life where you never take any risks, because that's also part of it.
And so what was the most successful technique? I mean, was it meditation that helped, and, do you have to keep doing it? I mean, is there like an epiphany associated with, great, now that I know, like, I don't need to worry and you're done? Or is it like something that you have to kind of practice all the time to kind of keep at bay?
Okay, so I don't know. I don't meditate currently because I have a toddler, and meditation for me is like when he's asleep and I just like get to stare at my phone. But uh so I did meditate, and my neuroticism did go down, and I meditated a lot. I did like the full Monty. I meditated for 45 minutes a day. I at no point enjoyed meditation or felt like I was on a higher plane or like I'm really in touch with God or like, anything like that. I was just sort of like, okay, when is this going to be over? When is this going to be over? Until the timer went off. I will say that the class that I took along with the meditation had sort of this Buddhism light kind of component where they would kind of walk us through Buddhist teachings every week. And some of them were surprisingly helpful because I realized that a lot of my anxiety and to some extent depression was associated with self-blame. And it kind of like released some of that self-blame a little bit, at least like to hear someone else say it in a way that was kind of like helps you see possibilities other than like you are at fault for this misfortune. It really, that was really beneficial to me. I don't know if someone with like a different kind of psychology would take something different away or maybe nothing away. But so one thing that she would tell us is like things happen that you don't like. And I know it sounds really dumb, but I had always kind of blamed myself whenever things happened that I didn't like. And it was just very nice and comforting to hear that from someone else, that everyone experiences misfortune, everyone experiences things that they would rather not happen. And, a big part of life is how you adjust to those things. So that really helped me reframe a lot of neuroticism.
Now, this wasn't a theme in your book, but I mean, sometimes these traits are kind of heritable, right? I mean, from your parents. I mean, I don't mean genetically, but I also mean sort of, the environment in which you grew up and the environment in which your parents grew up. And you talk a bit about your childhood. I mean, to what extent do you think that your family background and your childhood that you describe in both books kind of helped to shape some of these traits early in life?
Oh yeah. I mean, personality is 50%-ish heritable. And I definitely think, all the trauma that both sides of my family experienced. I mean, living in Russia during World War II, my grandma was in a prisoner of war camp. My grandpa on the other side was in a prisoner of war camp on the other side of World War II because he was in Finland. My mom's parents were like dirt poor farmers who had like a lifetime of struggle. My parents immigrated in their 30s. And I think there was just a lot of trauma that was not really processed because that wasn't like a thing that people did, that did get inherited in some way, either epigenetically, genetically, or through just like, stuff they said to me when I was little. When I say that, I have to caveat that like 50% heritable means 50% not heritable, like means 50% environmental. And that's really where you have wiggle room. Like 50% sounds like a lot, but it's not 100%. And so I can definitely see when my mind is like tracking more toward like the stuff from the shtetl, and the stuff from World War II, and try to pull it more toward, okay, we're safe. We're in Fairfax County. Like, how bad is this really? So that's kind of like the ball game is working with that 50% that you actually have control over.
Now, the next one was openness. And, that one is, you talked about some way, you decided to go off to Portugal and learn how to be open and stuff. And, some people use psychedelics, right? And that seems to be one of those things that is a one-time deal, right? You take these things and there seem to be lasting effects, but you didn't do the psychedelic route.
I didn't. No, I hadn't had a great experience with psychedelics in the past. I am very anxious. And so like when things start getting loopy and like hallucinating. I'm not like cool. I'm like, whoa, get me out of here, So I wasn't, and I also was not part of a study. All like the stuff that I wrote about, and including the person who I profiled who did psychedelics, they were all part of research studies that have some flaws, but nevertheless, like the person was monitored. They had a scientist and multiple therapists looking after them. There was no risk of them doing anything dangerous to themselves or others. If they were having a bad trip, someone would be there to talk them through it. So I didn't have that, and I didn't want to do it without that. But some people, I will say, not everyone, but some people who have had immense trauma and immense kind of struggles in their lives with addiction, smoking, depression, whatever else, do see a huge burst of openness with taking a large dose of psychedelics. And it seems to persist for quite a long time. Do we know why this all works like it does? Not really. The closest I could get these researchers to say is that it seems as though what's happening is that the psychedelics are helping them kind of see their problem in a new way, or kind of cast a new light on this pattern that's been with them and almost seems like automatic. And so you do have this increase in openness to kind of process this problem, or to confront it. And then the kind of neuroticism and the trauma go down when you kind of actually work with the therapist and talk through the problem while you're on the drug. We think. Could a study come out like a year from now saying that's not how it works? Possibly. I kind of gave you the up to the minute when I was going to press version, but that's kind of all we know.
Well, I mean, you have a sense of kind of where you wanted to be on these different dials. With respect to openness, I mean, do we have any insight into kind of where we would want to be on the openness dial? Because it seems like, there's trade-offs in both directions.
Yeah. So, with openness, it's one where you want to be high, or it's good to be high, right? It's good to be high in openness. Although it's a little bit of a value judgment, because most psychologists are open, and so they're like, it's good to be like us. So people who are low in openness would not think that it's good. And that's kind of one of the problems with increasing openness, is that everyone thinks that it's good to be exactly where they are on openness. Some of the downsides of low openness: not ever trying anything new, kind of going to the same places, talking to the same people, sometimes being a little closed-minded in your beliefs can be downsides. But there are downsides of very, very high openness. Very high openness can kind of start to shade into psychosis almost, or like delusions or false beliefs.
Schizophrenia. I think those folks are very open. They're open to having all sorts of voices come in their head.
If literally anything can be true, right? Then like, what do you really believe? And so you kind of want to, I don't know. It's good to end up with a lot of these. It's kind of good to end up at like a B+, on some of them, instead of all the way at A+.
Yeah, because look, we like people that have sort of a true north. We like people that have sort of consistency and some stability and integrity, right? And if you're, ricocheting around, new things all the time, then, maybe people might suspect you of lacking some fundamental core or essence, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this really isn't about ricocheting. Like, it would be weird if you saw someone ricocheting. That's like a personality disorder. It's more about just changing your reactions and your habits and your behaviors so that so that you can accomplish your goals, and so that you're happier. It's not about presenting a false face to the world.
Now, agreeableness. Okay, so I think we all want to be surrounded by agreeable people, right? Why should we strive to be agreeable ourselves?
Agreeableness is one of those where it really improves your relationships to be agreeable. people who are agreeable have really deep and meaningful friendships and really good relationships with their partners and with their children. Parents tend to be more agreeable. This is one of those that I wanted because I was thinking about having a baby at the time that I was writing the book, and I felt like agreeableness is just something I wanted to be as a mom. And yeah, it's also a tough one because it's like that tweet that went viral like a few years ago that was like, I don't know how to tell you that you should care about other people. And that's sort of the problem with agreeableness, is that it's like, how do you tell someone to be nicer? And I did talk to some people who like felt like they did that, like they made a concerted effort to like be nicer to everyone, but it's hard. It's like very hard, and it required like often a deep and profound change in how they approached humanity. And it also is not one that like gives you a bunch of more money or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah. So how does one become more agreeable? I mean, you said that the longer you know somebody, the more difficult it is for you to be kind of agreeable with them. I mean, how does one get agreeable therapy? What does one do there?
Yeah, so a lot of the interventions for agreeableness are sort of like thinking about people in a more positive light. So it's sort of like
make excuses for people, right? Like
kind of, but it's like let's say someone like was a little bit curt with you or like mean to you in a meeting or something. It would be like, think of 3 reasons why they might have done that have to do with like how their day went so far instead of something about you. So it's kind of trying to come up with like more generous explanations of people's behavior than kind of what you might jump to typically. Like if you're someone who always thinks like this person doesn't care about me, or like this person doesn't care about their job, it's kind of coming up with alternate explanations. And a lot of people struggle to do that because it's very natural to try to fend for yourself by looking for ways that people might have it out for you.
Yeah. Some people say that, we fall prey to the fundamental attribution error, so that if they're, if they do something which we don't like, we tend to say that's because, there's something wrong with them. I found it very useful when someone said to me, never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. And that sort of made me much more agreeable.
Stupidity, but also just like their kid threw up on their shoes that morning, or they missed the bus. Like
those are separate things, right? One is to assign the blame to the environment. The other is to assign the blame to something they just simply can't help.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. So a lot of the interventions were around that. Like for the book, I wanted to like do something more illustrative. So I did things like volunteer. I went to a conversation workshop. What else did I do for that chapter? Those were the 2 big ones. And
yeah, for the conversation workshop, you said that it was all about kind of learning to listen and sort of suspend one's desire to, immediately pass judgment and respond.
Yeah, a lot of it was about how to get at the like explanation behind why someone was telling you something. So kind of like, like if I'm like, oh, I'm so excited this weekend, I'm going to a Kenny Chesney concert, and I just like can't sleep. I'm thinking about it so much. Instead of asking about Kenny Chesney songs, you would ask me, oh, like, why is he so important to you? When's the first time you heard him? Like, what meaning does Kenny Chesney bring to your life? And so it's kind of one of those things where you instead of trying to be a more sparkling conversationalist, you're kind of trying to peel back the layers of the person you're talking to.
Well, that seems to have a twofold benefit. I mean, one is it, makes that other person think you care more about them. And secondly, it kind of makes you care more about them, right?
Yeah. Because you start to have more interesting conversations that way. Because you're not just like interviewing each other. You're actually relating.
Well, and the final one was conscientiousness. And it seemed like you didn't need much help there. You kind of had that one down.
Yeah, I am very conscientious. Although I just forgot, right before we logged on, I realized I forgot to do something for work that I was supposed to have done by now. So conscientiousness goes down after you have a baby. Yes.
And so why is that? I mean, or does it just become domain specific, right? Where you're just super conscientious about your baby and nothing else?
I think tiredness, mental load goes up. Like there's just a limit to how much we all can process, and how much we can remember. And I remembered the OT appointment, but I forgot this thing that I was supposed to do. And so, I realized that it had not always come naturally to me, and I learned how to be conscientious. And that's what most people who are conscientious do, is they figure out systems that work for them, that remind them to do things that are important. And so every time someone's like, I just have a bad memory, or I just, I can't get places on time. Like you just have to come up with a way to do that consistently.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like conscientiousness can drive out a bunch of other things, right? That would, make your life interesting, because you feel like you have your checklist and you have your obligations and your duties, and you just have to kind of get through them, and it makes it more difficult for you to, experience life in the moment.
This is another one where, maybe you don't want to be on 100% on conscientiousness, because it can start to look like perfectionism or obsessiveness. We all know people who are no fun unless they're like, they always want to stick to like a very rigid plan or something like that. And you don't want to be that way. You want to be able to let loose. The key part of conscientiousness is not, letting other people down and not letting yourself down. Like a lot of the people that I interviewed, they tried to become more conscientious because they felt like they weren't really living up to what they wanted to be doing, which requires some level of conscientiousness to like study or like apply for jobs or like do anything,
And so you periodically would test yourself as you went through and did these things. And I mean, you saw these changes, they happened, right? I mean, it wasn't just a test. You weren't just kind of, playing to the test. You were actually seeing or feeling these changes kick in.
I was feeling it. I felt, especially extroversion, I was like, oh, okay, like this feels really good. This feels like more natural to me than introversion did. With neuroticism, I felt like it was much less pronounced. First of all, my score on neuroticism did not go down by as much, but also it was a much kind of slower and gradual process. And I kind of feel like meditation works in the background of your mind, kind of like it's a program that runs kind of imperceptibly back there, and you don't really you don't even really realize it sometimes. But I did notice the changes happening while they were happening.
Well, it seemed like for each of these personality traits that you wanted to modify, there were separate interventions available, right? You go to the anger management school for this thing, you go to meditation for this thing, right? You go to the improv for this thing. I mean, should we be thinking about them as maybe like, different machines at the gym? Maybe should there be like a one-stop shop where you just go in and say, okay, like, I want big abs, and I want,
the Bowflex personality,
whatever. And then they say, oh, okay, well, here are the reps you got to do over here. I mean, is that something? I mean, we all talk about how what kind of job we want to have, what kind of relationship we want to have. I mean, should we think about our personality as something we should aspire to? Like, should we say this is the kind of personality profile I want to have kind of when I grow up, and then lay out some kind of roadmap to getting there?
I mean, that would be amazing if people were insightful enough to do that. So there are different interventions for all of the different traits. And unfortunately, so some scientists in Switzerland did make a app where you could select, like, I want to be less anxious and I want to have more friends. And it would tell you what to do to get that. So it was kind of like the, do 50 crunches or do 50 push-ups or whatever. But that app is, because of a lack of funding, like never got off the ground. I mean, it is something where it would behoove, I think, especially young people, to think about not like maybe even necessarily what kind of personality do I want to have, but like, how do I want to approach adversity? Because like, you're gonna face adversity, like things happen that we don't like. And some of the scripts that you tell yourself about what you really want or what you really like or what tends to happen to you can be really sticky and not always helpful. So I would just be careful about what you're telling yourself about yourself and what you can and can't do and what you can and what you do and don't like, because those are elements of personality that you can change over time. And I don't know. So maybe it's not like looking at, I want to have a 84 on extroversion, but like, I would like a life where I have a lot of friends, and I want to make time for those friends. It's not something that I told myself very often when I was young. And, it would be a good idea to think about those things too, along with your job.
Well, it seems like if you reduce the neuroticism, then any shortcomings or deficiencies in those other personality traits will bother you a whole lot less, right? So,
yeah, maybe you just become so relaxed, you're fine with whatever. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, but a small reduction in neuroticism is like worth like $300,000 a year or something. So, yeah.
well, Olga, thanks so much for joining me. The book is called Be Me But Better: The Science and Promise of Personality Change. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.